Hey guys, welcome to a brand new spin-off series from Metropolis After Hours, Metropolis Spotlight, where each episode we're going to spotlight a classic storyline from one of the comics, DC, Marvel, something like that, that if you haven't read, you really need to. And this episode we're doing the Frank Miller, David Mazuchelli classic, Batman Year One. Now, what can be said about this? Batman Year One helped inspire Christopher Nolan's Batman Begins, and it sent ripples through the time stream. Basically, after Crisis on Infinite Earths, this was Batman's new origin, and it streamlined a lot of things. It also has a spotlight of Commissioner Gordon. Started spotlighting him in depth for the first time in the franchise.
It actually was one of the first. This is Frank Miller, and he's a very innovative storyteller anyways. But this was one of the first comics, I think, that actually began the trend of following one character's thoughts and then another character's also in parallel, kind of.
Right.
So this actually, it's kind of a film noir feel, very gritty and dark, 1986, 87-ish.
It seems to take place in 87 when it comes out.
Yeah, around the same time as The Dark Knight Returns, which we'll do in a later episode. So yeah, that's right. So this was actually first presented as a four-issue story arc within the original Batman series.
Yeah, from Batman 404 to 408. It's 4 parts.
Exactly. So it's now been compiled into softcover and hardcover editions, and this is like the 8th printing or something like that. But it's many printings later. It's definitely become a classic, and for very good reason. It's been really influential in the way that comic book stories are presented, because it sort of brought that whole film type feel to comic books and really began to showcase how comic books could sort of transcend that gap between, sort of like, fluffy fare to actually the silver screen in a very serious
and
sort of way.
Really contained the perfect blend of Frank Miller as the writer and David Mazzucchelli as the artist. I mean, the art just totally complemented the story just totally complemented the art.
It did.
It begins with Bruce Wayne being away from Gotham for 12 years and having just returned and wanting to change Gotham for the better, and Jim Gordon coming in as lieutenant into Gotham and wanting to change Gotham for the better.
Having to deal with corrupt police officers and politicians. It's basically Batman Begins in comic form, and better, in my opinion.
And also features Selina Kyle, which I think for the first time it was mentioned that Selina Kyle was a prostitute.
Which is no longer in continuity, actually.
Right. That they've sort of retconned that out, and so
quite wisely, I might add.
Yeah, I think so too. But she was just beginning at the very beginning of her career as a cat burglar, and as a matter of fact, she might be pulling her first caper in this one.
It really is Batman's origins, and if you're looking for the origin of Batman, you want to pick up Batman Year One.
It's very interesting because it shows Batman as a very green vigilante. He really
but not
hasn't,
to the point of making real dire mistakes.
He makes
mistakes, but not super dire.
He almost gets himself killed.
And he almost drops
it's a dangerous business.
He almost drops one of the guys that he fights 20 stories off the side of a building. Almost.
No, he doesn't drop him. The
but
the guy gets scared of him.
Yeah,
and falls over the railing.
And he gets scared, and Batman reaches out to grab him, and meanwhile, his two friends are attacking Batman, and Batman's just trying to ignore the pain and ignore the jostling about and hold on to this guy
for dropping 20 stories.
But his friends don't care.
Another thing that I actually liked about Batman Year One is, I might get in trouble for saying this, but Jim Gordon, to an extent, is kind of looked at as Saint Gordon by a lot of writers and so forth. This shows that
a very frail
Jim Gordon
ego, kind of.
He ends up not necessarily having an affair, but ends up kissing
On the verge of an affair.
female detective, on the verge of an affair.
While his
and
pregnant wife waits at home for him.
Yeah,
Right.
he's a very down-to-earth guy.
Yes.
You really get the sense of his subjugation and his unhappiness being stuck trying to manage the beast that is Gotham, and in that light, you really start to see why Batman is so essential and why he must emerge, because Gordon does the best he can with the rules he's hamstrung with. Batman
Right.
can operate outside those rules.
Yeah, Gordon is actually fighting not only the horrendous crime problem in Gotham,
But
also
But a system that doesn't work in
corruption.
Gotham.
Yeah, corruption. The commissioner at the time that Gordon comes in
Commissioner
is
Loeb.
He's in cahoots with a lot of the big kingpins in the city, and he's like on the take, and so there's a lot of graft, there's a lot of crime, there's not a lot of tolerance for a clean cop who wants to fight crime in a clean way.
Yeah.
And but Gordon keeps on getting himself assigned to cases that end up being very high profile, and he ends up in the media and being portrayed as a hero. And this doesn't sit very well with his compadres, as you might well imagine, but they really can't do anything about him because he makes good headlines. And so everybody's kind of watching, and it's really hard to administer a beating to him without people knowing.
Yeah, as I said, very similar to Batman Begins, but not so similar that you can get by without reading it. It is Batman Begins with because obviously it doesn't have any major supervillains appearing in it. It's much more subdued, much more character driven on the side of Commissioner Gordon, whereas in the film Batman Begins, it's all character driven about Bruce.
Right.
So Gordon really gets the most of the spotlight here, which is
He
not
does.
to say Bruce is a minor character,
No.
but because
they're kinda
he's a
equal.
character we had seen much less of internally at the time.
Right.
Right, and you're really getting Frank Miller at the top of his game as compared to more recently. But you
Well,
really are
Miller's a
getting
very
Frank
hit or
Miller at
miss
the top
writer.
of his
Yes,
game.
he is. But in this case, he was definitely on his mark, right on the money with this. I think he really captured the flavor of Gotham, of Jim Gordon's character, and of Bruce Wayne and Batman. Really sort of brought them all to life in a way that he hadn't been, I don't think, up until then. We're coming out of that whole 60s campy era and then into the Neil Adams super realistic portrayal, and then into this, which is much more stylized, much more stylistic, and it's much more atmospheric.
Yes, but much more gothic and gritty,
Right.
which is exactly what Tim Burton tapped into in his first Batman in '89, just 2 years after Year One came out.
Right.
Right.
So it pretty much that and Frank Miller's The Dark Knight really helped set the tone for Batman in the '80s, and then naturally with Tim Burton's film, it set the precedent for Batman all the way
up until today.
Batman Begins.
Right.
So if you're a fan of Batman or a fan of the films, a lot of Batman Begins, as Flynn said, started right here, and you really couldn't come up with a much better Batman story than Batman Year One.
As you're reading it, though, do recall that this is long before modern coloring techniques, and so just remember that this set the tone for everything that came after.
It's a classic.
It is a classic.
Anyway,
It really is.
we gotta go, guys. So see you next time on Metropolis Spotlight.